Hi there, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about a topic that I've been postponing for a while now. I have no idea why. We're going to talk about some Arabic literature. Since I grew up reading and grew up in Arabic and reading Arabic novellas, I thought it would be a good introduction for you guys to this world. I want to walk you through 7 of the best novels in Arabic, in some cases trilogies, that you can find easily in English. We've got family epics in Cairo, oil empires in the Gulf, exile and identity in Palestine, and historical heartbreak in Granada. So basically light stuff, very cheerful. Alright then, let's start with a big boy, the Cairo Trilogy by Naguib Mahfouz. If Arab novels had a starter pack, the Cairo Trilogy will definitely be in it. This is the classic of classics, the mother of all Arabic novels. And it comes in 3 books, Palace of Walk, Palace of Desire, and Sugar Street. And together they follow the story of a family in Cairo from around the First World War to the end of the Second. At the center you have Ahmed Abdel, a father who rules in his household like a little dictator, strict, authoritarian, and obsessed with reputation at home. Basically every Arab father ever. And then at night he's out drinking, flirting, and doing everything basically that he forbids his family from doing. The trilogy lets you live inside this house. His wife Amina, his sons, his daughters, and even later on his grandchildren, as they fall in love, join political movements, get heartbroken, rebel, surrender, all of it. What's genius is that the family mirrors Egypt itself. Their drama reflects the country's transition from traditional structure towards modernity, nationalism, and social change. Questions like, how do you negotiate religion and modern life? What does honor even mean? And how much do you owe your parents versus yourself? Those are family questions in the book, but they're also national questions. Mahfouz, who later on became the first Arab writer who ever won the Nobel Prize, was obsessed with squeezing an entire society into a small everyday space. And here that space is one middle-class Cairorean family. Time itself becomes a character, we watch the years pass, revolutions come and go, and the family shifts with them. If you like multi-generational sagas, if you enjoy watching society change through the eyes of one family, this book is for you. Next up, we have a book that is short, but definitely explosive. It's Season of Migration to the North by Sudanese writer Tayeb Salih. On the surface, it's about a young Sudanese man who goes back to his village after studying abroad. When he comes back, he discovers a mysterious figure in the village, Mustafa Said, another man who once lived in London and had, let's just say, a very intense history with European women. The novel slowly reveals Mustafa's past in England and how that past crashes into village life in Sudan. The book is often described as a post-colonial response to texts like Heart of Darkness. Instead of the European going to Africa, we get the African going to Europe, and then he comes back. It looks at what colonialism can do to people, their minds, their bodies, their sense of masculinity, and even their relationships. And I want to be honest with you, this book is deeply disturbing when it comes to violence and gender. It shows vicious misogyny, including scenes involving female circumcisions, forced marriage, and sexual violence. The point obviously is not to glorify this, it's to expose how patriarchal and colonial violence can get tangled together and how women end up paying the highest price. Salih here manages to make the village feel both intimate and symbolic. The Nile, the fields, the communal gatherings. You feel the rhythm of rural life, yet at the same time, the weight of global power politics pressing on it. If you are into post-colonial literature, complex, unreliable narrators, or if you just like books that leave you going, what did I just read? This one is for you. Just go in knowing it's dark. And if you ever wondered what a novel would look like if it argues back to European literature, this is basically that argument in narrative form. Now we move on to the Gulf with the discovery of oil with Cities of Salt by Abdelrahman Munif. This one is huge. It comes in 5 books and it takes place in a fictional oasis called Wadi al-Ayun, the Valley of Eyes, somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula, at the moment when American oil companies show up and basically bulldoze their way into the landscape and the social fabric. We watch villagers pushed out of their homes, tent communities destroyed, new ports and oil installations rise, and with them, new ruling elites, new forms of corruption, and completely new kinds of inequality. Munif doesn't follow just one hero. He gives you an entire society, an entire community. Bedouins, farmers, clerics, workers. The transformation is so brutal, so fast, that it almost feels like science fiction, except it's clearly based on the history of the oil states in that region. The book also shows how environmental devastation and foreign intervention all feed into each other, including the emergence of more rigid, more politicized forms of religion. Munif himself is fascinated. He comes from a mixed Arab background, trained as an economist, worked in the oil business, and then basically turned around and wrote this huge literary indictment of the oil economy, and therefore the regimes that benefited from it. Many of his works were banned in Saudi Arabia, and he even lost his Saudi citizenship. If you like epics, if you enjoy reading how capitalism and imperialism literally reshape geography, this book is for you. Now let's head towards Palestine and Iraq with a novel that is a little bit more experimental and introspective. This is In Search of Walid Massoud by Ibrahim Jabra. The premise sounds simple. Walid Masoud, a Palestinian intellectual living in exile, disappears. His friends and lovers try to piece together who he really was by remembering him, reading his tapes and his writings, and telling stories about him. But very quickly, the book becomes less where did this guy go and more who are we, as exiled people, as intellectuals, and as Arabs living in the late 20th century. The structure is fragmented. Multiple narrators, different places, different time periods. Walid becomes almost a myth, a mirror onto everyone else's obsessions and failures. And that's deliberate. The novel is about how it is impossible to fully know another person, and by extension, a homeland that you've lost. Jabra himself was born to a Christian family, survived violence and displacement, and later on became one of the key figures of modern Arabic literature in Baghdad. A novelist, poet, translator, and painter, he introduced a lot of modernist ideas into Arabic. It is a very modernist Arabic novel with all the complexity that implies. This is a great pick if you like character studies, metafiction, and books where mystery is psychological rather than plot-driven. This is also a perfect example of how Palestinian literature doesn't always talk about occupation as an event, but about the long, messy afterlife of exile and memory. Speaking of Palestine, we really have to talk about Ghassan Kanafani. Preparing this episode, I really had a hard time trying to decide between two of his work. It was between Men in the Sun or Returning to Haifa, but I ended up picking the latter because it has more depth. The story follows a Palestinian couple, Saeed and Safiya, who were forced to flee their city Haifa during the 1948 war, and had to leave their infant son behind in the chaos. 20 years later, after the 1967 war opens some borders, they're allowed to visit Haifa again. They go back to their old house and discover that their son was taken in by a Jewish family, raised as an Israeli, and is now working in the Israeli army. You can tell already that the setup is emotionally devastating. But Kanafani doesn't make it simple. It's not just we're right, they're wrong. He gives the Jewish adoptive mom, Miriam, her own pain, her own history of loss, and lets her speak too. The conversation in that house becomes a brutal, honest confrontation about responsibility, history, and what it means to belong somewhere when the land is confiscated and soaked in trauma. Kanafani himself was a major figure in Palestinian resistance, a writer, critic, and activist who was assassinated by the Israelis in Beirut in 1972. His fiction is famous for being politically sharp yet deeply human. In Returning to Haifa, you see his ability to hold multiple truths at once, the injustice of dispossession and the humanity of the other side. If you've ever had someone tell you the conflict is too complicated and you wanted to just scream in his face because that phrase is often used to avoid taking a stand, this novella is the opposite. It embraces complexity without dodging responsibility, and it does it under 100 pages. Now it's time to move to Iraq with The President's Gardens by Muhsin al-Ramli. This novel starts with a horrifying discovery. Severed heads are found in a village, and from there, the book goes back in time to trace the lives of three friends who grew up together and were shaped and shattered by decades of war and dictatorship. You get village life, the Gulf War, the sanctions, and the Saddam Hussein era with all of its madness. One of the friends, Ibrahim, ends up working in the president's gardens. Those gardens which sound glamorous until you realize what it actually involves and how close it brings him to the regime's brutality. The novel contrasts the everyday warmth and gossip of the village with the obscene cruelty and luxury of the political elite. Palaces with golden faucets and immense wealth standing right next to a country that is falling apart. Al-Ramli writes with an immense detailing of Iraqi life, the way people joke, the way they endure, and the way faith and fate are both used to survive in conditions that are almost unbearable. There are very tender moments in the novel, especially in Ibrahim's marriage, that make the later tragedies even more harder to read. This is a great choice if you are interested and you want to read more about Iraq beyond the headlines. It gives faces and names to all the people who lived through those sanctions and wars we get to hear about abstractly. And if you like books about friendship tested by history, you'll find a lot to love here. Finally, we go back in time across the Mediterranean to Muslim Arab Spain with the Granada Trilogy by Radwa Ashour. This trilogy, often published in one volume, is set after the fall of Granada in 1492, when the last Muslim kingdom in Iberia collapsed and the Christian rule took over. Instead of focusing on kings or sultans, Ashour here focuses on the lives of an ordinary Muslim family trying to survive the new order as their language, religion, and culture are systematically erased. We follow several generations, and starting with Abu Ja'far, a bookbinder who witnesses the mass burning of Arabic books and dies from grief, and continues through his descendants like Salima, a strong, intellectual, and curious granddaughter. You see the increasingly harsh laws, banning Arabic, forcing conversion, burning books, and deportation. The trilogy doesn't just show the moment of conquest, but the long, slow process of cultural suffocation over a century. Ashour's style here is very intimate, very human. She drops you straight into scenes of conversations, domestic life, love and fear, and lets bigger historical events crash through the lives of these characters. She was written from Egypt, but the story strongly resonates with questions of loss, identity, and resistance that are very alive in the Arab world today. If you like historical fiction, this is an absolute must. It also gives an Arab perspective of a period that Western readers often only see through the lens of the Reconquista, without thinking what it actually meant to the people who lost everything. Let me know in the comments which one of these you've read in the past and which one you're curious about. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully with a book that hurts a little bit less emotionally than these did.